Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting, and this is for all of my gingerbread lovers. I'm going to be transforming an antique tea set into this wonderful sugary holiday decor piece. I'm going to walk you step by step of how I create it. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration and it's all about the gingerbread. I'll give you some more information about that a little later. Well, I'm going to walk you through the steps and hopefully I'll inspire you to take a second look if you see some of these sets at your local thrift stores. This particular set was a great find because all 4 pieces were together. I first cleaned it off using some denatured alcohol, and since this set was a metal set, I used some of the Rust-Oleum black flat paint. It works great on metal. It usually takes about 2 light coats of paint to cover the set completely. Once I had it painted black, I decided to use the color Warm Caramel in the Rust-Oleum paint as well. It's a great gingerbread color. The only thing bad about this particular one is that it was satin because it didn't come in matte. So I did end up having to go ahead and coat it with a layer of matte varnish so I was able to get my paint to stick. Once the brown had completely dried, it took about 24 hours to dry. I decided I was going to use a red color in the chalk paint called Crimson. The crimson color, I decided to use it on the handles, some of the tops, and just some areas. I put that on with a brush. It took about 2 coats to cover, but that color looks really pretty for this red and brown gingerbread theme. I did give all of my pieces a light sanding, and the best material I like to use for this sanding is really the brown paper lunch sacks. I can crumple them up and then give everything a nice little sanding, and it won't sand through any of my layers at all. It's just a nice fine grit of paper to use. For all my different pieces, I definitely wanted to add some patterns, checks, and striping. An easy way for me to create a freehand check pattern or a stripe pattern is I find the center, then go directly across, mark another check pattern, go to the sides, find the center halves, and then go across. And then divide that next area into half and then come across again. If it looks good to your eye, it looks fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to measure. So I just like to do this freehand, eyeball it kind of check patterns on my pieces. I was going to be creating a red and white check pattern, so I took some white paint and used a flat brush, about a 3/4 inch flat brush. That worked perfect for the size that I wanted, and I could easily paint those check marks in. For the top of my teapot, I decided I would create a peppermint candy look. So I wanted to create more of a swirl. And because I can't go into the exact middle and have that little tiny point for my candy, I used the little button on the top of my T-point as my center point, and then I just curved it around, making 3 different shapes. To paint those little shapes in, I decided to switch up and use an angle brush. I love using an angle brush because it has a nice little point on one end, but you still get the advantage of a flat brush to be able to smooth your paint out smoothly when you're painting. Again, it's going to take a couple coats of paint because I'm going over the red paint. A great tip I wanted to share with you is to always have a few Q-tips on hand. These work great as erasers when you're using acrylic paint. You can dip them in your water, squeeze them out at the end, and then go in and slightly rub those oopsie areas or where you overpaint, and it works great for that. So I always have a box of Q-tips sitting on my table when I'm doing acrylic painting. On this particular teapot, I did have that wider neck, so I needed to figure out some sort of pattern, and I decided a stripe would work the best. I wanted to create a feeling of maybe perhaps a chef hat in the end, so I used a piece of paper to just kind of help me line up where I was going, and then I did the line work the same way all the way around. You can see here I did use a little tape underneath each of my stripe just so I could bring that color all the way down to a nice little edge where I would be adding the white to my hat. If you've ever tried to tape on a circular surface, you know it's almost impossible to get that tape all the way around in one piece. So it worked out great just to have these small little ticks of tape all the way around to help me get a nice straight line. I recently purchased a new chalk pencil and it's spelled Bohin. I have no idea how to say it. It's from France, but it's got a nice little fine point tip on it, and it worked wonderful to go ahead and mark on this item because you can erase it with water. It does have an eraser on the opposite side that works really well. I should have been using this all along instead of my pencil because the pencil marks are dark. They take a little bit more time to paint over, but using this chalk pencil, it worked great. I should have thought of it earlier. Definitely check out this pencil. I'll have a link down inside of my description box. You could check it out if you might be interested in having one of these pencils. If you like to do acrylic painting, this is a great tool to add to your toolbox. I was able to use this chalk pencil to freehand all the faces on my teapot, and I have a creamer and a sugar item as well, and it worked out great for that. And again, having those light lines of the chalk instead of the dark lines of the pencil, I was easily able to go over it, erase them, and you're not going to see the lines in the end. It's a great tool to have. For the candy noses of my gingerbread, I used the same crimson color as I had used on the other parts, and I'm going to be using an angle brush to be able to paint the noses in as well. Again, I have the advantage of having the one end that has a sharp little point, but then the flat part of the brush to be able to smooth it out. This works just so much nicer than trying to use a round brush or just a flat brush. Having that little extra tip really helps go around the curves easier, and having the flat part of the brush spreads my paint out so much more evenly. It's going to take a couple coats of paint. I was designing this character as I was going, and I thought I wanted to have kind of a bright greenish blue eye, and I chose the color Sea Breeze. But after I got them painted and I set them off to the side and looked at them for a while, I thought his eyes looked a little scary. I don't know, there was something about having that bright blue and then just maybe the smaller black pupil. It just didn't look right to me. I do change it in the end. You'll have to let me know if you think it was a good idea to switch it up a little bit. But right now it just looks a little intense. I do add some shadowing to this, but even with that shadowing, his eyes still didn't look quite right. It always takes a little bit of time when you're designing these characters to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. I was going to be creating some floating shadow looks on my piece, and this time I was going to be using the Folk Art floating medium. I like using a floating agent. It does help with the open time and creates a really pretty soft shadow from dark to light. You simply just load your brush with the floating medium, dip the corner of your angle brush, that's what I prefer to use. In the one corner, rub it back and forth on your palette to distribute your paint from one end of your brush to the other, and then simply go ahead and stroke it underneath the area that you want to create your little floated shadow look. It's a great way to add shadowing and depth to your items. Now it's going to look like it's not just sitting on top. These items are going to have so much more dimension when you float a little bit of shadowing on them. For the dark brown shadows, I use the color Burnt Umber. It has a nice red undertone brown color, and it was a nice contrast to the warm color of the caramel color of the gingerbread. I mostly centered around the nose. I did a little bit on his smile, on the outside of his eyes, and underneath his hat, as well as the red stripes. To create a little bit more toasty glow to some of the white areas, especially his hat and the stripes on his handle, I used the color Cocoa as the floating color. It just added a nice little glow to those stripes and added so much more dimension by having a little bit of shadow in those white areas. For the very top peppermint candy, I was going to be leaving that area white, but I did add a little bit of toasty glow to that very top one. It kind of reminded me of a little bit of a toasted marshmallow look. To add the highlight to my eyes in the dark area, I use the color Spa Blue in my small 1/4-inch brush. I do the highlights on the right side of each eye. I also use that color to create a little bit of a highlight on the top of his nose. I like the idea of using the Spa Blue instead of a bright white. It just adds a nice little shadow without being super bright by having the blue instead of the white. I had created the dark shadows in my eyes using turquoise blue and my little angle brush, and now I was going to be adding some dip dots with my stylus. I went ahead and I dipped the end of my stylus into white paint, added the highlights to the right side of my eyes by dipping it on, and then I did a dip dot drag where you dip your stylus in and then drag it down to create a little comma stroke mark. It's a great way to add little highlights to those areas. Again, you can see how I really do use that Q-tip to help me out if I make a mistake. And here I had added my dip drop drags and I didn't like them, so I was able to erase it with my Q-tip. I'm adding a few little highlights to his nose as well. I'm still going to be fixing those eyes, so hang with me to the end to see what they look like. To add the finishing details to the top to make it look more like a candy piece, I added a little red highlight inside of my white area, and then I took the white and added a white stripe following that curve as well. And then once those two paints had dried, I used the color, the turquoise color, the darker blue color to add a little bit of cool shadow at the base of each of the white area. This really did change it up from going from, I didn't want that toasty marshmallow look like I had for his hat and on the handle. This added that element of looking more like a hard candy by floating the blue color on there. Hopefully you can see the difference, what it looked like by adding the blue. And then the final detail to add even more of a glossy look to it, I did 2 stripes of white just to add a few little accents, and I think it looks like candy. To finish off his hat on the front next to his candy, I was going to be adding a few little sprigs of green. I chose a medium, a dark, and a light shade of green, and just a small little round brush to tap in a few little greenery pieces here and there. And I think that finished it off really well. To create the little glow for his cheeks, I used the color Tuscan Red, and I tap my old scruffy brush into the paint and then I rub it onto my hand until it feels dry, and then do circular motions and scrub the paint on. As long as the paint is feeling dry, I know I'm not going to have too much on my brush, but just enough to create those little soft glowing cheeks. I blushed a little bit of that Tuscan Red color on his nose as well. And as the finishing touch, I add a few little dip dot drags to his cheeks, just to add the little bit of sparkle there. For the finishing details for my spout, I was going to be dipping the end of my paintbrush into my paint and then creating little polka dot patterns all the way around the spout. I was going to be switching back to my stylus to create a small little pattern at the top of the lid in those little checkerboard areas. I was also going to use the end of my paintbrush and create some red dots on the handle in that area as well. For the finishing touches on the tray, I used the same dot pattern in the red area, and then I used that deep burgundy color to do some freehand stripes inside of the white checked area. I think this was a nice finishing detail, and it's coming all together. I had done some floating of color earlier around the dark area, adding that deep burgundy color of float colors to the red, and added just a tiny bit of that little toasty brown color to the white as well. Now to go ahead and add some scribbly bits and some line detail using my Kimberly 9X XB pencil. I love adding all the little line work using this very soft graphite pencil. It's great for making lashes and little fine lines. I like using it better than a paintbrush. I feel like I have so much more control, and I love the line work it creates. By pushing and pulling the pencil, it creates such really beautiful line work. I wanted to take a moment to say a special thank you to our hosts today, Dawn, Monica, and Jody, for hosting today's gingerbread collaboration. You're going to find the links to their channels inside of my description box, as well as a playlist of all the other videos that have been contributed for today's gingerbread collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels, and click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to find some very creative gingerbread ideas. After finishing the graphite pencil work, I switched to using a China marker in the white color. Sharpie makes this brand of pencil. They're very easily to find, super inexpensive, and it's a great mixed media tool for adding these soft color crayon white marks. Now let's fix these eyes. I sat and looked at this guy for quite a long time and decided that what had to happen was I needed to cover up more of the colorful part of his eyes and make the pupils a lot larger. That's just going to calm down or make that eye look less intense by having a darker area and just having a little bit of the blue showing. I like it now. Before it looked a little bit way too intense. So by adding that darker color, and then I also added a shadow of a navy around the outside of the eye to even make that blue even less intense. As a final little accent for the cheeks, I added these little twirl circles using my Sharpie pencil. And I think he looks adorable now. I'm so glad I took the time and fixed his eyes. Now for the little cuties of the set, the creamer and the sugar, I wanted to add some extra detail to those as well. For the creamer top, I wanted to carry on that candy feel, so I created a hand-drawn stripe all the way around to give it more of a candy top. For the little faces, I did little gingerbread faces on each of the little creamer and the sugar. I had hand-drawn them on paper first and then just freehand them on using my chalk pencil. I love my new chalk pencil. It really does add the extra freedom of being able to know I can draw on it, but if I need to make some changes, I can easily erase it. Because these faces are so small, I did have to change up the size of the eyes, so I just made little teardrop shapes, and then I circled their faces with some really cute little frosting looks. I still did the same shading process of adding the burnt umber around the edges to add the depth, added that little toasty brown color into the white. Even though these eyes are small, I still floated that sea blue color on the right side of each eye, and then added a dot highlight on the right side of each eye. Continued on with the little sparkles on his nose. I add the little scribbly bits again using my Kimberly XXL pencil. I gave him some cute little eyelashes and added the same little scribble bits around the frosting area. All the little details that I had done on the larger piece, I'm continuing on the smaller ones. And of course, these little pieces need rosy cheeks as well. Each of the little pieces turned out so darling, and I love the little details even on these little characters. See how sweet his hat looks on top? I just love it. Well, let's take a look at what this piece looks like all together and sitting in my studio. This is the second repurposed tea set I have created. Here's my Halloween one I have done. I have a video for it on my channel. You can check that out if you'd like to see how I created my Halloween set. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel grow. If you enjoyed this tutorial of how I created this teapot set, here's a couple more videos you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.